Hello, everyone. When we're called upon to reflect on our career aspirations, on our chosen professions, or on the very nature of the organizations in which we work and study, David Whyte directs our attention to what he calls the conversational nature of reality, to change the nature of the questions we pose. He asks us to consider, how are we being invited to live? What vocation enables us to feel most alive? A poet-philosopher, David Whyte has authored 8 books of poetry, 4 books of prose, and numerous recordings. 3 of his books focus on work and vocation and have topped business bestseller lists. His body of work invites us to reimagine and rededicate ourselves to a deep understanding of our life's work. He calls us to take up the invitation to the fiercer aspects of existence and, in effect, become larger, more generous, more courageous, equal to the task of growing and maturing ourselves. He is one of the few poets to take his perspective on creativity and vulnerability beyond the literary world that most poets inhabit. An associate fellow at the Said Business School at the University of Oxford, he has developed a significant body of work on creativity and organizational development. His pioneering work in the area of courageous conversations has brought him into some of the top organizations and executive education programs in the world. David embodies a bardic lineage through his poetic eloquence and thoughtful commentary, deftly illustrating human experience, while reminding us to keep asking the kinds of questions large enough to live that David argues have no right to go away, as they serve to deepen and sustain our engagement with our real work. David does not simply write poetry for a living. Rather, he lives at the edge of an authentically poetic existence, and then he writes to tell about it. His work summons us to tread toward fully inhabiting and feeling all of the arrivals and departures of what is essential on this human journey. For his commitment to poetry, philosophy, and the leadership of courageous conversations that we need now more than ever, it is my honor to present David Whyte the degree Doctor of Laws, honoris causa.
Mr. David Whyte, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Royal Roads University Act, and in accordance with the recommendation of the Board of Governors of Royal Roads University, I confer upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, with all the rights, privileges, and honors here and elsewhere thereto appertaining. Mr. Whyte will now be hooded by Dr. Steve Grundy, Vice President, Academic and Provost. President President Alan Cahoon will now present Mr. David Whyte with his degree.
Thank you very much.
It is with great pleasure that I now call upon Dr. David Whyte to deliver the Convocation address. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. President and Chancellor, faculty, and students and loved ones of students. It's a great honor to be here and to have received this recognition. When you think of how formalized the study is for your first degree and how hard you work, it's lovely to have one come just out of the ether with no late night studying, except, of course, for the study you put in yourself out of your own care and love and heartfelt wish to follow a path where there's no outside coercion on the subject. Yeah. And I do think that education is always something that deepens in our understanding the longer we follow it. And we think to begin with we're going in for a degree, we think we're going in just for a job. And when we get our job, we think the job is for certain qualities, certain personal ambitions, and the job itself deepens, and then it usually deepens into responsibility and leadership, and at the same time we deepen into family, into being a parent, into being partners, and we deepen into being citizens of our countries at the same time. We have to keep all of these conversations alive. And to my mind, the courageous part of the conversation is the fact that as human beings, we're inescapably vulnerable to caring for things and people that move us in a particular way. Each of us is made in a different way for the conversation of life. And the great task is to find out what we care about and to risk ourselves on behalf of that caring and on behalf of the people who are within the bright circle of that caring. And we're all standing on a very powerful threshold in history right now. The forces that are at play in the world are really quite astonishing, quite overwhelming, quite difficult. We have an election in the country where I live now, where I've made my home in the United States. We could be just in for a difficult 4 years of trauma. We could be at the beginning of the attempt to institute fascism in the world, And we don't know, but we all have to be vigilant and we all have to pay attention. And as your anthem says, we all have to stand guard, actually, and be present and risk ourselves on behalf of what is most important to us. So this is a piece. I can't come on stage without working with a piece of poetry, recite a piece. And this is dedicated to all the graduates here, but a particular graduate who I'm very fond of in my life, and that's my Irish niece, Marlene McCormick. And I want to take you out to the west coast of Spain to a place called Finisterre in Spanish, or Finisterre in English. And I want to take you to an experience that Marlene McCormick had on that cliff edge, looking out over the broad Atlantic. And I've known Marlene since she was a little girl on a farm in a beautiful valley in North Clare in the west of Ireland. But like all little girls, she grew up into a young woman, and she left this paradisical farm and went off to do a degree in Irish drama at the University of Sligo. And she went to study drama not to teach drama, but to actually become a dramatist, to become a playwright, for which you get very little corroboration in the world. I remember when I went full-time as a poet, there were no people rushing up to me, slapping me on the back, saying, "Great career move, David." And I hear they're taking them on at Bombardier now in droves. Yes. No, people get very, very silent. And you meet a lot of silences in your life, but the silence of the father-in-law is beyond all silences you've ever met in your life. Saying, is there any shred of evidence to say you can keep yourself, never mind my daughter, in any manner to which you want to be accustomed? But all of us, whenever we're taking taking an individual path, always meet the equivalent of the father-in-law silence. And Marlene also met this silence, not much corroboration for becoming a full-time playwright, especially in Ireland where the standard is so incredibly high. And when she graduated, deciding with this degree in Irish drama that the major corporations of the world would not be knocking on her door. Although I told her after working 25 years in organizations all around the globe, a degree in drama is what would most prepare you for the corporate world, actually, yes. You work with accountants, drama. You work with actuaries, drama even. You work with Paris fashion houses, definitely there's a lot of drama there, but wherever you go. But Marlene, in order to make this transition into her life, was very good to herself, and she went off to walk this very famous pilgrimage path called the Camino de Santiago de Compostela. Yeah. And it's an old, 1,000-year-old Catholic pilgrimage, which has now become beautifully ecumenical in that people from all over the world, all persuasions and no persuasions at all, are walking this path. Yeah. And you walk for a good few hundred miles. You go for 5 to 7 weeks, and you go to Santiago de Compostela. But then you have the possibility of going on another 3 days to the coast, facing out to the Atlantic, almost as a postscript. And you arrive at Finisterre almost always in the late evening. And you go through 3 rituals there. And the first ritual is that you have a tapas plate of scallops. And the scallop shell has been the emblem of your walk. And in medieval times, the pilgrim wore the scallop shell woven into their clothes to show the local people that although they were strangers, they should be given the benefit of the doubt. And just a few weeks ago, a man was exhumed from a grave in a monastic ground in England with the scallop shell woven into his tunic. And this man had gone to Santiago de Compostela in the 14th century, yeah, and it had been the largest part of his life. Yeah. And I remember Marlene telling me about this ritual, and you go through 3 rituals, in fact. And Marlene was saying I was a little puzzled by eating the scallop and the scallop shell, and I said, well, you know, you're following that scallop shell with an arrow beneath it almost all the way, because incised into stone archways, into wooden posts, all along the way is the scallop shell with an arrow beneath it. Yeah? And it says, go this way, pilgrim, don't go that way. This is the way to Santiago de Compostela. Yeah? And in a way, when you're eating, and by the way, I'm sure there's a vegetarian alternative for those who are worrying about what are you going to do when you get to the end and you don't eat seafood. But in many ways, the ritual is asking you to consume the essence of your journey. How did you get to this place? For all of you graduating today, you know, how did you get to this Finisterre in your life, the place where ground turns to ocean? How did you follow your individual conversation that brought you to this place? When you're left to yourself, when you don't feel bullied by circumstances, when you don't feel coerced, how do you hold the conversation of life? And it's different from every other pilgrim who's taken the way. No matter how many other people have walked the Camino before you, no one has walked it in the way you will walk it. No one has held the conversation. No one stands at this place in history as you stand. So what's the essence of the way you are made? And then the second ritual Marlene went through was that you burn something that you brought. And so there are little fires all along the cliff edge, and people usually burn a letter or something that they brought, or they write something and actually burn it, or they burn an item. And so these fires are going day after day after day. They almost never go out because people are continually arriving. I said to Marlene, what did you burn? She said, I burned 2 postcards and a letter. I said, that's astonishing, Marlene. 23 years old and you had paper. You didn't just get out your iPhone and delete a couple of traumatic texts, you know. Although I'm sure there's a Camino app, you know, where you can And it will make a spontaneous flaming disappearance in your phone, when you. No, of course, and we know what's on that letter and those postcards and letters that other people would burn. It's previous forms of love and affection that are no longer in season. Yeah. They were deeply felt at the time, but now they're no longer felt, or they're no longer appropriate, or they were never reciprocated. And so we let them go at this cliff edge. And then I said, well, what was the third ritual, Marlene? She said, the third ritual is you leave an item of your clothing there at Finisterre. Yeah. So there are piles of clothes all the way along the edge of the ocean. Yeah. And you leave, of course, only something you could have brought with you. You must have worn it or carried it. So you leave, there are piles of hats and gloves and scarves and rain pants. And I said, Marlene, what did you leave? She said, I left my boots. And I love those boots. They fit me perfectly. I never had a single blister the whole way, but after 7 weeks, they were finished. I left those boots and walked away in my trainers. She said it was really incredible because the sun was going down. It was a beautiful sunset, but it just happened to be full moon at the same time, with the full moon coming up behind me in the east. Yeah. And even after the sun had dropped down below the far horizon, the moon could still see the fallen sun. And it was reflecting it, and it was so powerful that after the sun had gone below the horizon, I had a moon shadow that was walking across the water. Yeah. And we got into this conversation by my asking her what was the most powerful moment you had on the whole Camino, the whole 7 weeks. Yeah. And she said, I saw my silhouette walking across the water. I saw my shadow walking across the water. And I thought, oh, that's my new self walking into my unknown life as a playwright. But then suddenly, as the sun fell further and the moon began to lose its reflective power, the shadow began to disappear. And I had a moment of panic, but then I had a moment of realization. I realized, she said, the most powerful moment on the whole Camino was when my shadow disappeared, and I realized I would have to walk across that unknown sea myself. Yeah. I would somehow have to navigate this path into the future. There are great lines by a Spanish poet, actually, Antonio Machado. And if you ever want a free glass of red wine in a bar in Madrid, you learn these lines in broken Spanish and shout them out in the bar. And the rest of the bar will finish them with you, and you'll get a free glass of red wine. It works like a charm. Yeah. But the lines are very powerful, and they are caminante no hay camino, si hace camino al andar, si hace el camino. Pathmaker, there is no path. You make the path by walking. By walking, you make the path. Pathmaker, pathmaker, there is no path. You make the path by walking. By walking, you make the path. Yeah. So this is the piece I wrote for Marlene McCormick, and I'll leave you with this piece. As you all stand as individual graduates and as families on this Finisterre, either of stepping off yourself, or of letting go of a loved one into the great adventure of the next dispensation of their lives. And this is called Finisterre for Marlene McCormick. The road in the end, taking the path the sun had taken. The road in the end, taking the path the sun had taken into the Western Sea. The road in the end, taking the path the sun had taken into the Western Sea, and the moon rising behind you as you stood where ground turned to ocean. No way to your future now except the way your shadow could take, walking before you across water, going where shadows go. No way to make sense of a world that wouldn't let you pass, except to call an end to the way you had come. To take out each frayed letter you had brought and light their illumined corners, and to read them as they drifted on the late western light. To empty your bags, to sort this and to leave that, to promise what you needed to promise all along, to promise what you needed to promise all along, and to abandon the shoes that brought you here right at the water's edge, to abandon the shoes that brought you here right at the water's edge. Not because you were given up, not because you were given up, but because now you would find a different way to tread, and because through it all, part of you would still walk on, no matter how, over the waves. Thank you very much.